I'm going to be dropping some gems today. Listen up.
Lend your ear, open your mind, you're gonna learn a lot about your past and yourself you didn't know before. The past affects your future.
The information I compiled in this video comes from these two sources here. It all starts with a Spaniard named Montejo who sails from Spain all the way to the Yucatan in order to take possession of it and colonize the people who were living there. As you can see, the Yucatan is clearly in the Americas. I blew it up so you can see it even closer. You can clearly see the United States above, Belize right below, and Cuba off to the right. My purpose for showing you the map and where all of this is located, what we're going to be discussing, is to prove to you that these people were nowhere near Africa. Prior to colonization by the Spaniards, the Indians got along fine. They lived in well-ordered communities where their priests were pretty much in the center of town. Everybody was taken care of just fine. And, there was just no need for them to have any sorts of weapons. All of that changed upon the arrival of the Spaniards from Europe, who was unaliving them, enslaving them, just doing all sorts of wicked things to them. And the Indians were now in fear of being taken into captivity. So a lot of them retreated into the forests in order to avoid captivity. I am going to come back and revisit this whole issue of the Indians over here in the Americas being afraid of being taken into captivity. A side note is that there was a split amongst the southern Indians and the northern Indians. The ones in the south from Mexico all the way down to the bottom of South America, they were idolatrous. They did not believe in circumcision, and they also did human sacrifice. The Indians in the north above Mexico, they called them the noble northerners because they were not into all that. This video is about the ones in the south, so we'll continue on with them. The Indians were idolatrous, so the Spaniards burned thousands of the Indians' idols. They burned their hieroglyphic scrolls, which they deemed as works of the devil designed by the evil one to delude the Indians and to prevent them from accepting Christianity, which they forced on the Indians. The Indians fiercely opposed being turned into Catholics. Christianized. They hated it so much. They fought it tooth and nail to the point where the Europeans, the Spaniards, they began to cut off their limbs to punish them. They unalived many of them, forcing them to accept their God, their religion, Christianity. In what has been named the Franciscan Order of the Yucatan, the Spaniards also burned remnants and traces of the Indians' history. My opinion is that this is an effort to distort the true identity of the Indians. So what do these Indians look like? What do they wear? Breeches. Anyone that knows anything about breeches, you know that this is written in the scriptures to the Israelites. They wore breeches, the Levitical priests to be exact. The Levitical priests were instructed by their God specifically to wear breeches when they performed rites, rituals, sacrifices, and things of that nature on behalf of the Israelite community. A description of the hair on their head and on their beards was that it was rough and coarse like hog's bristles. We all know who has hair like that. The Indian women of the Yucatan were called negresses by the Spaniards. They said that the Indian women were dark-skinned, that had much larger and better bodies than their women, with large behinds that they called haunches. It is abundantly clear from the notes of the Spaniards that the Indians of the Americas were so-called black people. They were never called Africans. They were called Indians, and they were called negresses. It is extremely important for you to note that it was the people over here in the Americas who were afraid that people were going to come and capture them for fear of being taken into captivity, not people in Africa. I also want you to keep in mind that in Africa, there are many different types of people over there. You don't have a bunch of Negroes. All of the so-called black people in Africa are not all Negroes. There are just some that are Negroes. If you go to the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10, there is a breakdown of all three of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It tells you all of their descendants and ancestors. The Zondervan Dictionary points out that Noah's son Ham became the progenitor of the dark races, but not the Negroes. This here is proof alone that Ham's descendants are the Hamites, who are also the Africans. It's really interesting how the colonizers and enslavers love to just lump us all into the same bunch. Oh, they're all the same. But they can be Grecian, French, Russian, Ukrainian, from Turkey. They can all be different people, have different customs and cultures. We all have to be the exact same people. It's no different from there being different types of Asians. You have your Japanese, you have your Thai, you have your Chinese, you have your Korean, you know, there's some Cambodian, there's so many different ones and everything. This is a European mapping system that indicates where the Negroes in Africa reside. It's called Negroland, and it is in West Africa where the Negroes are concentrated. Everywhere else in Africa are the Africans, the Hamites from Noah's son Ham. From the top of the Americas all the way down to the bottom of the Americas, this is where all of the so-called Negroes are at. For the mere fact alone that there are not any stories that are circulating in Africa about how their ancestors had to hide from the white man because he was coming to take them into captivity. It's very safe to say that since we experienced that over here in the Americas, the slave trade actually happened from here. People were actually taken into captivity from the Americas. And most Africans could care less about the transatlantic slave trade. Listen up.
How do Senegalese really feel about slavery and what happened? Because, you know, there were a lot of very foul people involved in the slave trade. There was, of course, Europeans, you know, Jews and whites were involved. But, you know, Africans were involved in it as well. They were selling off their enemies.
We've kind of overcome the thought of slavery. We don't even think about it.
You actually know your history. You can trace your family back 100 generations, whatever else. You still have your real names.
I think it's also the art of just letting the past go.
There's also been no reparations.
Unfortunately, man, it's not like America is going to take the initiative to do it. Indians got reparations. The Jewish got reparations for Holocaust, and it wasn't even done in America. Italians got reparations. Japanese got reparations. It's to the point now where African Americans have to really understand they're not sorry. They don't care.
Yeah.
It's obvious.
Are you still convinced that we are the same people? Don't the same people normally care about their own issues? Now what? Huh, Pan-Africans? Huh? All of y'all are caring so much about what's going over there in Africa and how they're being treated so badly, but most of them could care less about our plights and what's going on with us over here. And if there were slave ships, where are they at? I haven't seen any proof of them. Have you? Take a look at this.
One of the best documented accounts of the transatlantic slave trade. In 1860, slavery was still legal in Alabama, but importing new slaves was banned. Wealthy Mobile landowner Timothy Mayer made a bet he could pull off an illegal run to Africa. He paid Captain William Foster to sail to what was then the Kingdom of Dahomey, today Benin. He forced 110 captives onto the boat, then sailed back, sneaking into the Mobile River under the cover of night. Foster took notes about it all.
I then took my schooner and burned and sank it, says Captain Foster. Clotilda basically took a sharp turn and went up that way, and somewhere up there was burned.
So then all the experts came back. It took them 13 months, but last week they verified that we had found Clotilda.
Child, I was born, but not yesterday.
The ship Bunch was looking for was discovered in the archives of Cape Town, South Africa. Anthropologist Steve Lukeman found an old investigation into a Portuguese ship that hit bad luck at the Cape of Good Hope. 200 slaves drowned in the wreck.
We have the captain's account, and he signed his name here 220 years ago.
In 2010, the wreck was discovered, found dozens of artifacts, but this may be the most revealing. X-rays show it's a shackle, similar to this, used to bind slaves.
The São José is a slave ship that starts in Lisbon, travels to Mozambique, picks up captive Africans to sell them into enslavement in Brazil. The ship goes down just off the coast of South Africa.
So there were allegedly hundreds of voyages from Africa to the Americas carrying slaves. However, there's nothing to show for it. There's no ships. There's just a board from a ship. There are some shackles. And then there's a book that a captain allegedly wrote in. And so none of the voyages were actually successful. I ask again, where are the slave ships to prove that slaves were taken from Africa and brought over to the Americas? Where are they? Get your favorite snack and come right back. If you're enjoying this presentation so far, please do not hesitate to comment, share, like, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you in advance. We have inherited lies. We have been betrayed by the American miseducation system.
I love the theme, America healing. But first, let's think about something. Where did America come from? Has it always been America? Or was it just created to be America? Who are the real Americans? America keep changing and changing and changing. let's go back in time when the American Indians looked like I look and roamed the southeast part of the United States freely. I love what the mayor said. We have to tell the truth. We cannot heal America till we fix the foundation. Can we start right there?
Do you know that there were indigenous black people in the Americas, and they were Moorish black people, and that the chopping of the cherry tree of George Washington was him officially cutting off their inheritance and their history from ever being remembered, and that he had written and said that in 200 years, if we remove the turbans from their heads, the sandals from their feet, and we make them think that they are just like any other black people, that they will forget their entire history and their inheritance and the fact that they are indigenous to the Americas.
The lion heads are in Sedona. The Olmec, the statue of the Olmec in Sedona, you guys. Sedona, Arizona. Singing birds. These are bird beings, you guys. Again, bird beings are in the rocks. These are ancient temples in Sedona from ancient Atlantis. They try to say that Atlantis is a fable, is a myth. No, it is not. It predates Kemet. Queens and kings of Sedona. Atlantean queens and kings. These are the queens and kings of Atlantis, carved within the rocks in Sedona. When water wears on rocks, then the appearance of them disintegrates. Look at that face right there. We are here. We have been here. We didn't come from no daggone Africa.
An ancient Egyptian city is found in the Grand Canyon, along with a sphinx. Here are before and after photos of how it looked before it was destroyed by the Europeans.
Explorer G.E. Kincaid took a boat down the Colorado River and through the Grand Canyon. The canyon was rich in minerals like gold, silver, and copper, and Kincaid wanted to see what he could find before the area was closed off for good. On the walls, he saw it was ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. G.E. Kincaid now realized he was in a huge complex. He estimated that as many as 50,000 people could have lived here. The rooms were full of ancient artifacts. Then he came across another large room, a crypt. The crypt had shelf upon shelf and row upon row of mummies, dozens of them.
A pyramid and a sphinx were found 7 miles outside of Natchez, Mississippi by a construction crew. The Dead Sea Scrolls were found in the United States of America, and they profited from the sale of them. An Israeli archaeologist purchased 4 Dead Sea Scrolls that were for sale, listed in the Wall Street Journal, for $250,000 on behalf of the newly established State of Israel. Most of the $250,000 that he received for the sale of the Dead Sea Scrolls actually went to the Internal Revenue Service in the United States. Why? Because they said the bill of sale was drawn up incorrectly. So if the Dead Sea Scrolls are found in the United States, sold in the United States, and the United States profits from the sale of the Dead Sea Scrolls, does that not tell you ancient Israel is actually in the United States? And guess what language those scrolls are written in? That's right. Ancient Paleo-Hebrew. The Dead Sea Scrolls include fragments from every book of the Old Testament except for the book of Esther. You should be getting chills right about now, and alarm bells should be going off. You are now looking at an Old Testament map of ancient America with Egypt, the Egyptian Sea, Israel, Assyria, Babylon, and the Great Sea. I now present to you evidence that the slave trade happened in reverse. People were taken from the Americas into Europe and Africa. We all know the story about how Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. He headed straight to the Caribbean, where he went to places like Trinidad, Cuba, South America, and Hispaniola. But did you know that Christopher Columbus had established trade in sex slaves on Hispaniola, with victims as young as 9 years old? These are the colonizers' descriptions of what the native people look like from Canada all the way down to South America. It tells you that they're copper colored, that some of them are dark skinned. It says some are swarthy complexions, but we come in many different shades. Columbus sent 4 ships back to Europe loaded to capacity with 550 natives that were auctioned off at Mediterranean markets. He did several journeys. You might be wondering, well, who is Christopher Columbus? Why does he think he has the right to do something like Christopher Columbus had his sights set on finding the Garden of Eden. But he first needed permission to explore lands that were already occupied by people, the indigenous people. the copper-colored people of the Americas, my ancestors. It was already a known fact that the colonizers felt as though God gave them the permission to give the indigenous people the gospel of Jesus Christ. Through the doctrine of discovery, they were able to accomplish whatever it was they set out to do, which was to increase their territory. And to show you how closely Bible and history go hand in hand, Noah blessed and cursed his offspring. He actually told Japheth, may God enlarge Japheth's territory. And through the doctrine of discovery, through the Catholic papal bulls, Japheth, which are the colonizers, was able to do just that, increase his territory by stealing it from his brothers, Ham and Shem, who were also given land allotments as well. The papal bulls is a type of public decree or letters or patent or a charter issued by the Pope of the Catholic Church. It is named after the leaden seal bulla, traditionally appended to authenticated. And you're looking at such patent or charter. And it was this papal bull that allowed them to be able to go to the indigenous people's lands, the Hamitic and the Shemitic people, and basically steal their land and subjugate the people. Why? Because they were not Christians. And so this is pretty much what it was saying, that if lands and resources are inhabited by non-Christian populations, it is asserted that the Christian nations had the right to acquire the territory and establish dominion over the lands discovered by the explorers after disregarding the existing rights and cultures of the indigenous peoples. The rest is history. We know how they went to America and also to Africa, specifically the Congo, chopping off people's limbs, stealing people's land, giving them a god that looks like them to worship, just completely subjugating us down to this day. And so what was their justification for colonization? It provided a legal and religious framework for European colonial powers to justify their expansionist policies. Expansionists, extend Japheth's territory. You see, it goes hand in hand. This is how they were able to extend their territory, expand their territory through stealing the land. It allowed them to claim ownership over the lands and resources and even the people who lived there, which is why we were all subjugated and still are to this day. Now, it says that it led to displacement and dispossession and subjugation of indigenous populations. There were a series of indigenous removals that were handed down from the Catholic Church. Now, this is in South America, how they made proclamations and ordinances to burn the indigenous people of South America out of their lands in 1550. And the rest is history. They took it over, the Spaniards, completely. This is how they dispossessed some other lands. Not only that, but also the same thing happened in America. Through President Andrew Jackson, the United States went through the same thing that South America went through, the Indian Removal Act. He signed it into law and began removing my indigenous ancestors from their lands forcefully. A lot of people lost their lives in that. And then that's what prompted also the Trail of Tears, which was another removal, the renaming of our people over and over. At this time, they were naming us Negro. And for those who did not want to be reclassified as Negro, they were forced to leave the lands, their homes, and to take a trek to Oklahoma, walk, and go live on a reservation over there. Some people stayed put, many of them left. And so many of them lost their lives on that journey as well. I'm not one to tell someone who they can and cannot worship or how they should and should not worship. But if you look like me or similar, and if being a Christian sounds like a good idea to you, I'm not sure which planet you're on right now. I would just have to say that you're still caught up in the matrix. Now, keep in mind all of the suffering that we as indigenous people have been through. And it's a result of Christianity. And not only just that, Islam did it first. Christianity copied off of Islam. So if you are in either of those two religions, I'm just going to implore you to think again, rethink that decision. Why? Because of all of the suffering that we've been through from America up through Europe into Africa and beyond. It's because of religion. These religions gave them the okay to subjugate us and put us through the poverty and the hell that we've been through and the slavery and the colonization and the chopping off our limbs and everything else that we've been through. It's through religion. Religion has made possible the subjugation of our people, point blank, period. Columbus and his other European buddies raped, abducted, traded, and sold for sex indigenous women all over the Caribbean and South America. Christopher Columbus is responsible for forcing thousands of natives all over the Caribbean islands and South America into sex labor, as well as seizing, selling, and exporting Native women and children to their fate as sex slaves. The result is a centuries-long process of genocide and colonization of Indigenous people, including the enslavement of 2.5 to 5 million Indigenous people, death of Indigenous people by disease, murder, dismemberment, rape, land theft, destruction of animals and natural resources, starvation, removal, concentration camps, and forced religious conversions. Okay. So people who do such wicked things, how can they give you God? We know that Christopher Columbus did not go to North America, but other Europeans came and they did the exact same thing that Christopher Columbus did. All of these horrific things that the Europeans did to us indigenous people, it actually reduced the population. In addition to that, there were treaties that were made between our indigenous ancestors and the Europeans, which they broke every last one of them. There were actually peace treaties. An international law called the Doctrine of Discovery enabled Christopher Columbus to make 3 expeditions to conquer non-Christian people. Now, did you hear me? We were not Christians. The Doctrine of Discovery gave him the permission to come and Christianize us, turn us into Christians, and to export us everywhere, enslave us, and do all of the wicked things that these Christians did to our people. In 1493, Pope Alexander VI issued a papal decree that indicated more explicitly that only Christian rulers could legitimately claim land ownership in our lands. This is how they acquired our land for free. According to Columbus's notes, men seized about 5 women each as their concubines, while others marauded across the island in search of villages with gold. So they basically stripped us of all of our wealth, our homes, our land, and everything else of value that we had. And this is how they ended up becoming rich. It's a true story of Robin Hood, because they robbed all of our hoods. This is how they got their wealth. For women and children being valued 50 to 60% more than the men because of breeding purposes. This is how they ended up whiting out South America. Now these people are Hispanics. Hispanics, mestizos, are the end result of them raping our women and using them for breeding purposes. Do you realize that this Indian slavery that our ancestors went through was the antecedent to the sex trafficking that goes on today? The number of slaves in Europe during the period from 1500 to 1800 estimated to be just about over 2.5 million. Now, earlier, I mentioned that there were from 2.5 to 5 million. The rest of them were dumped in Africa. This is why there are Negroes in Africa today. I showed you that the Negroes are from the Americas. This is where the Negroes are at. This is where they are from. So how they ended up over in Africa is because this slave trade was actually told in reverse. They were taken from here, the Americas, up through Europe and down into Africa.
Please do not hesitate to comment, share, like, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you in advance.